Thank you for being a part of our conversation on tonight. We are here gathered together in brotherly love, coming to have a discussion tonight about things that are concerning our neighborhood, our community, and things that are concerning around the world. As I stand here on tonight, you'll see me standing beside an empty chair that has a newspaper and a rose in the chair. Tonight, we're trying to start conversations among ourselves, among our civic organizations, among the chiefs of police, among representatives from this community, so that this empty chair will not be one of our family members as well. So tonight, we have invited the city council from West Melbourne, Daniel McDowell. Thank you. He's from the West Melbourne City Council. And then we've also invited Scott Rooks, who is from Moms Demand Actions tonight. And we're grateful that he is a part of our panel tonight. We've also invited Lieutenant Craig Leonard. He's from the City of Palm Bay Police Department. And then we have our very own Chief, David Gillespie, who represents the Melbourne Police Department. We have Mr. Leonard Ross, who represents the Pushback Community Alliance on tonight. And then we have Chief Richard Wiley, who represents West Melbourne Police Department. And another person from Pushback is Miss Lisa Ivy. And then the one and only from Pushback is Reverend George White. Reverend George White is one of the clergy who is a part of Pushback as well. Tonight we're having what we call a simple conversation. And I believe that being able to communicate and converse with each other is the beginning of wisdom. And so I want to first thank all of our panelists who are here with us on tonight that took time out of their schedules on Saturday to be here so that we could start this conversation. Now tonight we are streaming this live, and so if you are a part of our Facebook audience, you have the privilege tonight to ask questions. We ask that you would put those in the chat box. We have someone that is monitoring the Facebook page as of right now, and the questions that you would like to ask of this panel will be asked, and we will include you in our conversation as well. I think it's important that we begin to talk to each other and not at each other. So tonight we open ourselves up to you so that we can begin the conversation. We're going to start out tonight with 3 questions, and these are discussion starters, but I think that they are important, and as you will see, they will begin a very comfortable conversation, and then we'll move right into where we're trying to go. So the first question that we will start out with tonight is how should we as citizens conduct ourselves? How should we as citizens of this community, seeing everything that's going on in other counties, in other states, around the world, how should we start out with our conduct toward what's happening all over? And so we're going to open the floor up tonight to 2 people that'll start us, and then we'll go from there. And that would be Chief David Gillespie, who is our chief here in Melbourne, followed by Mr. Leonard Ross, and then we'll begin our conversation.
Thank you, Bishop Gordon. I think one of the things that's very important for us to consider is it's a difficult time in our country right now with everything that's been going on in law enforcement and in our community for the past year and beyond. I think when we talk about how should we conduct ourselves, it's an interesting question. We have to really take a look at, one, what's going on with law enforcement, and what are the challenges that law enforcement officers face every day. I think we need to educate ourselves. We need to have an understanding as to, one, be able to understand what it is that's causing some of these issues and problems, and come up with a plan as to how we're going to address those when we talk about police reform. We also, in addition to education, we have to be able to have engaging conversations that are talking about very difficult issues. We need to be able to address race relations, social injustices. We could start over. So I think it's important, one, to educate ourselves, to really understand the dimensions that law enforcement face and the things that they confront on a daily basis. It's a tough job, it's very difficult, it's rapid, it's evolving very quickly. We have to also understand the dynamic of what the things are that we face in a community and engage the tough discussions and engage each other. I think that's what's really important for us and how we conduct ourselves. The other thing is we have to have personal assessments and responsibility. We have to look at what challenges we face, not just in the community, but in the schools. And we have to look at crime. We need to talk about crime in the African American community. And I think these are things that will help us start to begin some of the conversations where we need to be. When we talk about conduct ourselves, it's really about also expressing how we feel and having an understanding of people and what the challenges are in their community. So I think it's really important for us to continue that dialogue.
Mr. Ross?
Thank you. First of all, let me say I have a specific thing, a point that I wish to make, and it's in the form of a question, actually. And I'm fortunate to have three police officers here to correct me if I say this wrong. I've been teaching for a number of years to young people about how to conduct themselves when they are pulled over by a police officer. And you all are welcome to join in if you see something I may have gone wrong with. But this is what I've been teaching. That when you are pulled over by a police officer, go to a lighted area, drive your vehicle slowly, put your blinkers on so that that officer know you intend to stop. Go to a lighted area. Once in that lighted area, turn your vehicle off. Place your hands on the steering wheel of that vehicle. You got to remember something. When that officer stops you, he stopped you for a particular reason. And he is on alert as he walks to your vehicle to talk to you. And in order for you to diffuse that situation as the individual being stopped, you need to place your hand in a neutral position so that that officer can see those hands and know that you have no ill will toward them. Once the officer approaches the vehicle and asks you for your driver's license, give them to him. Don't argue about why you stopped me and all of those kind of things. Don't inflate the situation because it's a very, very critical moment at that time. That officer needs to know and feel good that I have a person I stop that is not going to be a danger to me. And then that officer, in his manner in which he approaches that vehicle and talks to an individual, needs to also be careful how he talks or how he asks for the driver's license or whatever he has stopped that vehicle for, and quickly explain to the driver of that vehicle why they were being pulled over, why they were stopped. And I just think that if we, on both sides of the fence, do those kind of things and remember those kind of things, that we will not have the kind of confrontations that some have had in other areas. We in Melbourne and in Palm Bay and in West Melbourne as well, we have been very, very fortunate to have police chiefs that we are able to communicate with. And as a result of that, take for example, the Melbourne Police Community Relations Council holds its meetings once a month. The thing is, those officers show up for those meetings, and they come in, they listen to the complaints that the citizens make, and they are able to not just listen when the chief comes back and say, this is complaint, but they hear them for themselves. And I just think as long as we maintain those kind of dialogues, I'm not going to ever say ain't nothing going to go wrong, but I will say, if we think about those kind of things, we'll be so much better in our relationship. And the other thing I told the chiefs here last week, I guess it was, one of the other things I think is absolutely critical, that the chiefs, when an incident happens, be wide open and truthful about it. Don't hide anything from the public. Tell them what happened. Now, I understand there are some things you can't talk about because of investigation and stuff, but give as much information as you possibly can and be truthful about it. If you don't have all the information at that time, say you don't have it. Don't tell people, well, we're doing this, we're doing that. Tell them the truth. And if you do so, we are not going to have some of the stuff that go on in other cities with people rioting and carrying on and acting a fool. I think that's all I got.
Okay. Well, first I want to thank Bishop Gordon and Chief Gillespie for inviting me here tonight. Pushback is an important part of the community, and it's good that we have this dialogue tonight. I think that the big thing for me is when I look at community relations, and I think that's what we're talking about, it's the mutual respect and trust. So when you can gain the trust of the community and they know that you're being forthright, exactly what Mr. Ross was saying, that you are transparent. And I'm going to give you an example. We have incidents all the time where citizens are upset, contact the police department in different ways through social media, emails, phone calls, or they actually put a physical complaint in by filling out a complaint form. Anytime that happens, that comes right to my office. And every time that happens, I talk with the complainant and invite them in and have a conversation with them in person, because I want to make it personal. I want to sit down and review the facts of the situation and look at body cams, for example. And I will tell you 99.9% of the time, the people that have come into my station and talked to me directly walk out feeling way, way better. They realized now they have all the facts. It's not perception, because you know what happens. I had a situation where an African American juvenile was stopped in a car, and he went home and told his mom that the police really mistreated him. So she was very, very upset, as you can only imagine, and I would be upset too. I had her come in. I said, bring your son in, bring everybody that was in the car, and we sat down and reviewed the video together. And that transparency, because I didn't know what the video was going to. If my officer's wrong, they will be disciplined too, by the way. It's just not, we're going to defend the police no matter what. That doesn't happen. I have terminated police officers and suspended police officers. So it goes both ways, doesn't it? We can't allow police officers to overstep their authority either. So, but at the end of the day, I will tell you the majority of times my police officers do treat the citizens with respect and dignity, and they don't violate their civil rights. So I think that's a very, very important aspect of how we police. And I'll tell you right now, Dave Gillespie's just like me, and so is Nelson Moya. We will not tolerate our officers mistreating our citizens, period.
Anyone else? Scott, you want to say something on that? Okay, Lieutenant. Leader.
Yes, Bishop. Thank you. I just want to thank you for inviting me here to this forum and having an opportunity. Chief Moya sends his regards and appreciates this forum as well. Mr. Ross, I listened to what you're saying, and I think you make a lot of good points and valid points, and I appreciate the discussion as well. And our openness about this discussion, I think, is really important. Here's the thing that I've heard quite a few times is people giving advice to especially those in the black community about how to behave when an officer pulls you over. And although that advice is good advice, and I agree with it, I think all people need to behave that way so that an officer is set at ease and feels more comfortable, because it is an unknown. I personally, when I'm pulled over, I do roll down my windows and turn my light on and put my hands on the steering wheel. And as well, I think what's important to what you're saying is that the police officers need to approach things in a way that is more amicable and more comfortable, with, for lack of a better word, when we're making contact with people. I think there's a miscommunication at times because of our heightened level of the way that we're approaching, that it sends our body language, our mannerism can be very intimidating, and sends a message that doesn't always line up with how we would like the traffic stop to go. And I think the openness and having that kind of dialogue about thinking about what it is for both people conducting that traffic stop and how it appears to both people. I will tell you that I know that black people in the community feel a lot more stress when they're pulled over by a police officer than perhaps a white person in the community, or even a Hispanic person. And there's many facets to why that's happening. And we can look at maybe the reaction from people in the community, maybe the reaction from the media about things, and maybe the reaction from the police culture. But this us against them kind of, I think, attitude that perpetuates in society is not only damaging, but enough is enough. This is, as the bishop mentioned to me before the forum, that this is nothing new. This is a history. So why is it a history? And let's honestly talk about that. And the honesty in addressing that issue, the sincerity in it, and the tough questions that need to be asked and communicated about, I think is a continuing thing that needs to happen to maintain it. So I appreciate a lot of the things you said, and from an officer's perspective, but I also want to make sure that sends the correct message to the community as well, and that the communication continues, because I have heard and listened to what black people in the community have conveyed to me about how that feels and what that message is sending. So let's continue to have that conversation. I appreciate it.
I guess the question that I would put out there from the younger part of the community is, how is the police department addressing that with officers? How are you scoping out? Officers are humans, just like the people they're pulling over. How do you scope out their prejudices? How do you scope out people who have very radical approaches on certain scenarios? Can you tell that? What kind of screening are you doing when you're employing an officer to point those things out? Because the bottom line is, it's an epidemic across across the U.S. And obviously, there are a lot of black people getting killed by police officers. So the question becomes, how do we stop that? How do we find out that even if it's the other way around, a black officer harassing Caucasian drivers, how do you scope out people with alternative mindsets?
Is that specifically for me?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think that's a great question, and I believe that the ongoing conversation is what's going to foster that, because this isn't just a quick fix. This is a systemic problem, as you're talking about. This is a history that's been going on. And part of that, the reason that it's a history is because of the lack of open communication and being open. And what I mean by that is that officers need to relate to black people in the community on other levels than just within their job. There needs to be socialization on non-tense situations within the confines of their job. That's a partnership that needs to happen within the community. And, officers, to maybe more specifically answer your question, how do we know what kind of demeanor? That all comes down to the very beginning of the process in trying to, which is a difficult process, in trying to weed out who it is that we can put in a uniform in that kind of position and have that kind of responsibility, because it's an immense responsibility.
I guess the question is, for an example, in our community, in the past years, there were officers that people were known, if you get pulled over by this particular officer or that particular officer, what the deal is. Do you guys randomly watch body cams just to see what 1050 stops look like without necessarily there being an official complaint? Just to see how people handle themselves?
Yeah, well, with the body cameras, the supervisors do have an ability to key in on the body camera and go in randomly, and the officers know that. And so the officers can, they understand at any moment they can be watched through the body camera. And so we do supervise that, and we do look for any kind of flag, so to speak. But that would just be one facet. Again, that has to really be dealt with long before the hiring process. And, and to understanding and the ongoing education and exposure to needs in the black community and the open dialogue and communication. I think there are some things in both the law enforcement community and the black community that need to be discussed openly because of misconceptions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does. And let me just, right quick, I agree with what you're saying, because as I grew up here in the neighborhood, there were certain police officers, you knew them by name. And you knew them to the extent that when you saw them, you had built a rapport, a relationship with them, and then they in turn knew you and they knew your parents. Okay, and so you were able to keep some stuff under subjection simply because you had a relationship with the police officer that patrolled your neighborhood.
Exactly.
And I like what you said about partnership. And I think one of the main things that we don't have a lot of is partnership within the community with the police officers. When we see them from a negative standpoint or think from a negative standpoint. But you all are human. You wear a badge, but you have the same feelings that we have, and you shed blood like we do. So somewhere along the lines, we got to stop and think, how can we do this together?
Thank you, Bishop. If I can just jump in here for a moment, because what I am concerned by and what I'm hearing, and I think we need to build on what was mentioned earlier, and that is that this is compounding. And I'm saying this from the heart. And that is that I'm in no way, shape, or form playing down the significant problem that we have with the black community and the situations that are happening nationally. It's a problem, huge problem. However, I do think that this is compounding because it is affecting all of us, to serve and protect all of us. And I can say that I personally, on my way here, stopped for the first time in my life
and got out of the car, and I didn't feel comfortable with another officer that was getting out of the car at the same time. So just kind of keep that in your mind, that perception's real. If there's a feeling that it's problematic and that there's a really shift and that there's a perception that you're not here to serve and protect, or it's shifted to the protect and the serve hasn't been as prevalent, something's going on here. And I think you need to be willing enough to identify that and see what's going on with the citizens. What's interesting is I had that conversation with somebody in this room that shared a similar feeling about that, and they were not black.
So if I could jump in. I think the one thing that we have to take a hard look at, and that's officer wellness. So when officers are hired, they go through a rigorous background check, they go through psychological screening, they have their assessments done, and then they go through an entire academy of 6 months worth of training. When they come out, it's 3 months in field training. And then after that, there's accountability, whether it's through their annual evaluations, and then we also know, because supervisors are on the street with our people. So that is the role of our sergeants, is to be out there, to make sure that our officers are doing the things the way they're supposed to be. And it's their responsibility and incumbent upon them to report back and hold them accountable at the scene when that happens. I think the grind over 15, 20, 30 years of being a police officer and dealing with the job that officers have takes a toll. And you can't ignore that, because when you look at it from walking in the uniform perspective, the fact is we know that there are mental health issues. There are issues that officers faced because of the events that they have seen and witnessed, been a part of. These things are very difficult on the officers, and I'm not just turning it to say it's just about the police. It's not. But that does take a toll, and that's something that we have to look at, and that is officer wellness. We need to make sure that our officers are in the right frame of mind out there on the street. I think the other piece is, to answer your question about the body cams, we just started rolling out our body cam program last month, and we do have that in policy where we do random checks. There's a certain percentage of videos each month that we will have, and supervisors will review those to make sure that officers are in compliance, but also that there could be training issues as well. Lastly, the most important, one of the most important things I think for us is to really talk about where you said people are dying, black people are dying at the hands of police. And I think that's a separate part of this question. I think that's really the crux of where we're at tonight, and what's really motivating us to be here and have this conversation. And it's very complex. It's not just a matter of just one or two items. This is a complex conversation that we have to continue to have, because it has layers deep. We're scratching the surface, and we need to be talking about all of the factors that we have to overcome. And I will say again, when we hire people in the police department, we got to hire the best people that we feel have big hearts, that are going to do the job the way that we want it done, the way that our community expects. We're going to provide them with the best training available to make sure that they carry out their responsibilities in the best way and in a safe way, safe for them and safe for our community. And the other piece of that is we have got to hold our people accountable. And without any one of those three, it's not fair to our officers that are out there, nor to our community. And so we are committed to all of those to make sure. And lastly, when someone complains, we have to have a very fair review from internal affairs process. And that we have, certain standards that we have to adhere to. But oftentimes, officers might say, well, why am I getting investigated for this? And, the reason is because people need to be heard. We don't know exactly what happened. We can look at the camera. It might tell part of the story, but not all the story. Or maybe the camera didn't capture what happened. But that internal affairs process is very important. And one of the things that we do, and I'm sure Rick and Nelson do as well, and that is at the end of that investigation, we get back with the complainant and we explain to them what were the results and why. And we will answer every question that they have, because we want them to know that if you're complaining, if it's something that you brought to us to look at, we're going to review that and we're going to give you an answer. It may not be exactly, you might be happy with it. A lot of times people are. But sometimes if it's not, it could be a misunderstanding or another conversation, that we do. So I think those are some important things as far as helping the youth.
Scott, you were going to jump in there. Then I come back to Chief Wiley, and we have a question from the Facebook as well. You don't have anything? Okay, go on.
I'm going to reiterate some of the same things that Chief Gillespie stated. Who you're hiring at the front end is very, very important. So we have to do a very, very extensive background investigation. But more importantly, how do you train them up front? Training equates to how they're going to perform. And you can change attitudes and behavior with good training. And Dave hit on the thing I think that is very, very important. It's the accountability factor. How do you hold your employees accountable? What are they doing the 12 hours that they're working on that street? I want to know. We have GPS on the car. We have in-car videos. We have body cams. I have additional supervisors on the street. I have lieutenants and sergeants on the street. So everybody's being held accountable. And more importantly, at the end of the month, because we do monthly evaluations, we're probably the only department in the country that probably does them, but we do them. And you know why I do them? Because I don't want, after 12 months, the officer to say, I didn't know this was a problem. Or I want to know that there's a problem up front. So we can work on that individual, because oftentimes when our officers do something wrong, it's training. You retrain them and say, you don't do that no more. Now, if it's discipline where they're intentionally doing something wrong from the heart, they're doing it wrong, then you have to discipline them. You may even have to terminate them. If it's from the mind, they made a mistake, I can allow some of that. But that may also need to be training and discipline, right? So, for me, it's holding people accountable at all levels, and making sure that I'm aware of what's going on, because I'm in the office. So the only way I'm going to know is if I drive out on the street and drive around 24 hours a day, which I'm not doing, or I get good communications from the organization all the way up, from the officer, sergeant, lieutenant, the captain, the deputy, myself. So I hold a lot of meetings that determine what's going on with my agency, but I also meet with the community too and reach out to them. I have a very robust crime prevention officer program. And, I talked about this last time, the juveniles. That's who I want to reach out to. And so we're starting a juvenile police academy. So we're going to have the young juveniles come into our department and go through a mini academy, and they're going to interact with my officers and all different levels too, right? They're going to, the different units they're going to get to see. They're going to be able to talk firsthand to them. We're going to put them through some reality-based training. They're going to learn about things, be able to ask questions. And there's nothing better, in my opinion, than having the juveniles interact with my police officers. And we have a skate park in my community, and it's loaded with juveniles, and it's loaded with a lot of different, it's very diverse. People come from all over. They come from as far as Orlando to come to our skate park. And what is interesting about that, I do a patrol area request, so my officers will go in there, not drive through, get out of the car, because that's when they do their best work, and interact with the community at all different levels. And we have a heavy transient population. People are driving through our community. People are visiting our community. We have a lot of stores. And we want to make sure our officers have some face time with people and talk with them. I also require my officers to do a school check, where they have to physically walk into the school. And when I first did that, everybody was upset. Police officers walking in the schools, what's going on? Who's getting arrested? Now they're used to seeing my officers walking in and out of schools. They have to do that every day. Even though we have SROs, right, in every school, I still want my patrol officers and supervisors to go in and out of the school. We do business checks the same way. Go in, talk to the manager, talk to the staff, let people see you. And exactly what I think Dave Gillespie was saying earlier, interacting with the community is very, very important. And when they see us, not just driving by with the air conditioner on and the windows rolled up, that's where you're going to make a dent in your community relations, in my opinion. Thank you.
And I do believe, though, that this is systemic, and I also was going to say just very quickly here that those are long-term solutions, and I applaud you guys for that. But we are also facing currently disruption in this town. And unless you cannot agree with me, there's people that are not very pleased with the law enforcement. And we need to start talking about the immediate situation that's going on too right now and what we can do as citizens. And I think that was the bishop's first question. As citizens, what can we do to change that perception? Because I do believe you're here to serve and protect.
From Facebook.
In a lot of police body cam footage, you see officers immediately approaching civilians at traffic stops or on the streets with their hand automatically on their gun. Is that a part of their training? Why are officers automatically approaching civilians with their hands on their guns?
I'll answer that question. So I'll throw the question back at you too. It depends on the traffic stop, right? If you have a felony traffic stop, you know the car's stolen, the officer's going to approach it in a different fashion, right? So we are taught to be tactically sound. Putting your hand on your gun may be the wrong thing to do depending on the circumstances, right? But it may be the right thing to do. I've had my gun out, and only because the spidey senses were tingling and I knew something was wrong, and I was right just about every time. Not pointing it at anybody, but just the ready to make sure. So having your hand on your gun, I would have to look at every circumstance of that traffic stop to make a determination. Is the person wanted in the car? Is the car stolen? Totally different, right? Are you making a traffic stop because somebody didn't turn their turn signal on? You want to be professional and not have your hand on your gun per se, but you have to be at a ready alert because you never know who's in the vehicle. It could be somebody that's going to harm the officer. So I'm not a proponent of keeping my hand on my gun, making a traffic stop, but I'm also very tactically sound. I'm not going to get shot either, if that answers the question.
So if I could just add to that real quickly. Officers are trained to approach each situation, and one, for their safety and the safety of whatever it is they're dealing with, whatever the situation. It could be a domestic, it could be an incident on the street, it could be a traffic stop. The officer's responsibility is to gauge the level of danger that they are encountering. So different if you stop a 80-year-old lady at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you stop a car with 4 or 5 people in it, tinted windows at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night, and you suspect them of drinking or being involved in criminal activity. So when an officer puts their hand on their gun, that's a decision that they are trained to make. It's not just something that is just flippant that they just decide every time I stop, I'm putting my hand on my gun or I'm pulling it out. That's not how they're trained. They're trained to make those decisions based on what's in front of them, and those are the things they're accountable for. That they're accountable if it's done in a erroneous way. But I think to really just to get that out there, to answer that question right to the person that sent that in is, yes, they are trained, and that's there. The other thing is we bring people in. Bishop Gordon had the opportunity to come in. Several leaders in the community came into the police department, and we put them through force scenarios, talked about use of force, had them actually go through mock traffic stops, and then go through the shoot, don't shoot type scenario-based system. It's very different when you're walking in the shoes of an officer. Your perspective completely changes a 180. And it's very difficult, so that's why it takes so much training to be able to make those decisions and then defend them. Because once you take some certain action, you're going to have to defend it because you're going to come under a lot of scrutiny. And
I
you
would
better be
like-
right because the margin of error is very thin right now.
I would like to make a comment concerning the West Melbourne Police Department. I had a new truck, and so I had a trailer. So the trailer, I turned too short, and it hit the back end of the trailer. I said, wait a minute, I got to get me a used truck. So I went and bought me a used truck. And I went to motor vehicle, and the motor vehicle said, the department says, we need to see the VIN number. I said, I don't. She said, the truck outside? I said, no. She said, we got to see the VIN number. And so the angels on my left side said, you know you don't have a tag, but the lady said you got to get the truck so they could see it. So the left side angel said, well, drive it to motor vehicle so they can get the VIN number. So I get the truck. It's like God, when this left angel told Eden that God said you cannot eat from the fruit. So this angel said, the lady said, bring the truck so she can see the VIN number. So I'm looking at, I said, that's sort of wrong, angel. And so the left angel again, so, well, you got that trailer and you got a tag already on it. So I said, yeah, I get the tag off the trailer, put on the truck. That looked very nice. And the angel said, now you can go to motor vehicle. So I get there on the corner of US 1 and corner Minton and Wickham. Truck stopped. I said, wow, and right at the gas station. Kendall, I said, okay, I ran across the street. I said, man, I got to get the motor vehicle. The truck stopped on me. He said, car by. He said, we got to get that thing off the road. So he said, well, we got to get somebody to bring a battery charge over there. So I said, okay, and I get out there. I see these lights. I said, Lord, Sugar Hill. Just went to insurance company, and the insurance man said, you know, you got a good record. Yeah, I haven't had no ticket in a long time. And then I'm saying to myself, now I'm going to get a ticket that I already told me I had good driving license. I haven't gotten a ticket. And it's like, boom, boom, boom. I said, sir, I said, this truck stopped on the battery. He said, I know. He said, we got to get this thing out of the traffic. And so I said, yeah. I said, one of the guys from Kendall. And he said, George, I said, he said, you know you got a trailer tag on that thing, don't you? I said, yes, sir. I said, I'm trying to get the motor vehicle. He said, you're not going to make it. Because my appointment was at 2:30. I don't know how. He had called in, and somehow or another, he knew that I had an appointment at 2:30. He said, you're not going to make it. He said, but what you going to do? You're going to have to get the sheriff, because I live in unincorporated West Melbourne, and come out there, and he said, I'm going to give you this form. And when the sheriff get there, you give it to him, he'll look at the VIN, then you go and get it. And I said, wow, that's what a good officer does. He didn't give me a ticket, but he checked things out. It's the unchangeable mystic of God. When you, as a citizen, when you, as a policeman, act like God, things happen that will benefit you if you handle everything right. I walked in the right way. I talked in the right way. And that eased the police. I didn't see him draw no gun. Matter of fact, he was smiling like Chief Riley did. It was one of your policemen. But I thank you. And I thank for him being trained the way it could have been, well, you're wrong, and I'm going to give you a ticket, but I didn't get it. And I thank God for being who he is. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to say that, and thank you.
No, thank you.
Bishop,
Sir?
I got something to say, but I would like I'd like for us to go back. Both chiefs mentioned about the hiring procedures. and how important they are, and they are truly important. But before I go into that, Councilwoman, I understand the issue of systemic racism. I understand that. But that's a people problem. That's how I decide to treat this chief or treat that chief. And it ought to come from a human aspect, as opposed to some class that you require me to sit in and listen to. But I've got to have the motivation in my heart to treat every individual I meet properly, based upon how they respond to me. But now I want to go back to the hiring procedure. And Chief, don't ask this, where did I get this information from? I got it, and I'm not going to tell you who gave it to me. A deputy sheriff in Fairfax County, Virginia, was fired from that sheriff department because of a number of factors that he had against him. He was a rogue police officer. He was found to be planting drugs on individuals. Fairfax County Sheriff fired him. He got in his car and drove to Brevard County, submitted his application to join the sheriff department here in Brevard County. And I give credit, you all know, some of y'all know the issues that I and the Brevard County Sheriff have had. But in my thought, we treat everybody right. And this I want to commend the Sheriff Department for doing the proper thing. However, I ask each of you to review your hiring procedures, and here's why. That individual drove to Brevard County, joined the Sheriff Department, and for 8 months he worked on the Sheriff Department. Now the Sheriff Department did what it should have done. They sent a letter of request to the training officer at Fairfax County, Virginia. And that training officer at Fairfax County, Virginia, gave this guy a clean bill of health. Somehow or another, the word was leaked out here a few months ago that this individual had problems previously. Sheriff Ivey sent to Fairfax County, Virginia, and the letter is very harsh in what he talks to the sheriff there. And he got the proper information about the conduct of this individual and why he was released. The Sheriff Ivey immediately released that individual, rightfully so. He should have even been charged with a crime, falsifying a document or something. But anyway, they fired him. And that's the reason I say to you, take another look at your hiring procedures. To call the training officer at one of these departments or something may not necessarily be the way to handle whether or not that individual coming from another department have a clean bill of health. And we saw that. And this is very recent here in Brevard County. This is not something old. This is very, very recent. He patrolled Brevard County for 8 months. And he should not have been on the road.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question from Facebook.
We have a few questions. Okay. So the next question, should officers be employed in the communities where they live? This would help with the officers truly knowing the people in the community that they police.
Yeah, can I answer that? Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely right. The officers need to be a part of the community so the community is familiar with the officers that are policing that community, so that there's a relationship beyond just the police contact, but there's more of a human interaction between the citizens and the officer. Also, in the city of Palm Bay, we are expanding our community resource officer program, and we're adding more officers to that, as well as putting a sergeant over that. And the community resource officer program is a way that officers in the department can spend more time with the community in being able to deal with specific issues or concerns of the community, because the officers running from call to call, don't always have all the time to deal with situations that they require, where they would require more time. So we are able to kind of delegate some of that to community resource officers, and I think that's important because that builds more of a rapport with the community and saying, hey, we care about the community. Here's some community resource officers where you can specifically sit down and we can really talk about these issues. So that as well as, going back to the training and hiring process, very important. That needs to be instilled from the beginning. The right people are getting hired, and the community as well needs to communicate with us about the officer's interaction so that we can deal. If we got an officer out there we're getting continued complaints about, absolutely, we're going to deal with that immediately. And I know that it's the same with Melbourne and West Melbourne.
Can I say something there? And I think when you have emphasis on the hiring process, I had the opportunity to work on the other side as well. And on the other side, after you go through a few IAs and after you get into a few situations, a lot of people's mentality, psyche change. People change. You had a lot of officers that could be angry, a lot of officers that have a lot going on. What do we have in place to notice changes to say that if someone's really mentally fit for duty?
Yeah, I think that's Chief Gillespie brought that up as well with the mental health of officers. And that's a great point because I'm actually the head of the critical incident stress management team in our department. And what we do is we do debriefings after critical incidents, and we help these officers to process these incidents in a healthy way. It actually offsets symptoms of PTSD by 80%. And what we need to do is we need to continue to foster and take care of our officers and make sure that our supervisors are aware of indicators as well, that when an officer maybe he's calling out a lot, maybe he's not, maybe he's getting more complaints from the community, maybe there's some other things going on, and the supervisors can recognize those red flags. Those issues can start to be addressed early, sooner than later, because I think festering issues is a part of what has created a lot of problems in the departments.
That's really good, because a lot of times after you get back, you just go 10-8, and you're just back on the road, and that's really good.
You're absolutely right.
Scott?
Is this on? Okay. I've heard several of you mention so far in the evaluation process about supervisors and chain of command. I'm just curious whether you guys are doing 360-degree evaluations where, in addition to the evaluation of the officer, instead of just the supervisor or the immediate supervisor, whether you're also taking input from not only their peers, but perhaps their subordinates too, so you get the whole picture. Because part of that mental health picture, I think everybody is pretty good about hiding their personal problems, particularly in a work environment, because you're worried about whether it's going to affect you. But I think your peers, whether it's that officer that's in the car with you or somebody that you see in a social scenario, may have input on whether something's going on that might be a good indicator to help you identify those officers that may be in trouble.
So we don't require the 360 evaluation. We do require the annual evaluation, and then if there's issues along the way, the supervisors will address them. I think what's important for us really is that as we continue to deal with and see somebody that has a number of complaints, there's early warning systems that are in place to identify those officers that might be having problems. You might see all of a sudden they're late for work 3 times. There are things that are out of the ordinary, out of character. They might have been rude or discourteous to a citizen or to the boss. And then we take a look at that, and then we will call them in and then deal with that through an early warning system. So it's not just through the evaluation process, because the evaluation process really is about performance more than it is about mental health. And so we put other mechanisms in place to identify that. In addition, we have peer support. So that is just like a CISM. It's really being able to reach out to another officer to be able to talk about whatever might be bothering them. And then PTSD is something that's real and that officers face. And then the other thing is a chaplaincy program. And I think it's important to have the ability for, our folks to be able to reach out to somebody of the clergy to be able to address some of the issues or concerns as well. And then the other is ongoing wellness and things. Suicide prevention is critical in law enforcement right now.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Facebook again.
How do I ensure that a police officer has his body camera on if I am stopped? I want to have my cell phone camera on as well for my own records. Can the police demand that I turn my cell phone off?
No. So you can videotape a police officer, say you're being stopped for a traffic violation. You're allowed to videotape that person, the officer. They're required in my department to turn on their body cam every time they have interaction with anybody. So if they don't, they have to fill out a form, and I'll check with IT to find out was there an issue with the camera. Sometimes there is a technical problem, or they forgot. If we're human beings, sometimes you forget, and I'll have to look at what the incident was. So, okay, what were you doing when you forgot to turn on your video? If it's a major incident, I'm going to be very suspect to why didn't you turn it on? Or was it something that was impromptu where they got into a situation and they didn't have an opportunity to? But by and large, we have video, either in their car video or their body cam. But we do monitor that very carefully. You can get terminated from my department, if you intentionally don't turn on your video. So they know it, because we're going to check it.
I got one more question. This person says, thank you all so much for being here tonight on this Saturday night. It really means a lot. My question is maybe, is it to, or does the officers or the chief of police ever go to families where they have lost loved ones due to gun violence and offer any services such as counseling from the state or the county? Or do they wait for the family to ask for help, or what is the procedure for that?
So, you referring to like a death investigation. So, of course, we would provide all the services that are available in the county here to those people. We have forms that we fill out. We have certain things for like domestic violence and those things that, and then we do follow-up as well with our victim advocates.
Okay, one other question. What are you all doing as far as with all the unconscious bias throughout the community? What are you all doing to address those implicit biases, and how can the community help with that? What can we do? What is our part to help you all with those implicit biases?
Well, I'm sorry, Chief. The implicit biases, that covers a broad range. It's very, I don't want to say, it's vague, because there's so many different things that can hit on. It's very complex. But this is what we're doing, this right here, and we got to continue to do this. This is what opens up the communication and the concerns with the community, and so the police departments can address these concerns. The officers as well need to have that message of support from their supervision, from the community, that can be openly discussed without being shouted down or maybe attacked verbally, but that people need to listen to each other. There's enough yelling going on. There's enough shouting going on. I think everybody can agree with that. It's time that we really give each other a chance to listen to what is going on in the community. I think that when we really start to do that, the officers as well will really, when they talk about implicit biases and stuff like that, I think a lot of that stuff will be understood and educated between the officers and the community. That's what needs to happen, if that makes sense to you.
Also, do you all believe that each and every police officer should work in the city where they live?
I'm going to answer that question because for me, it is important Every place I've ever worked, I had 3 different departments I worked. Worked in Philadelphia, I lived in Philly. Worked in Lower Sartara, I lived in Lower Sartara. I worked down in West Melbourne, and I live in West Melbourne. So for me, it was always important that I was part of the community. Growing up in Philly, I didn't want to live anywhere else, right? And when I moved, I knew that I had to integrate into the community and be part of the community. So to be honest with you, our officers can't even afford to live in West Melbourne, a lot of them. A lot of them do, though. A lot of them do live. A lot of them live in Melbourne. They live very close, within 15 miles, I'll say, from the department. So I'm very fortunate that I think all my command staff lives in West Melbourne.
Anyone else?
How do you break down the infrastructure, also known as the good old boy syndrome, in the department? Because sometimes when you make complaints, or sometimes you highlight things, depending on what officer get that complaint and who it's about, or which officer it's about, really determines whether it goes up the chain or not. So how do you break that down?
I'll answer that. It's a difficult issue when you're dealing with the culture of an organization. To answer it very shortly, it's in policy. You got to have it in policy that someone brings you a complaint. What is it required of that person to do with that information? So you require them to put it on paper and to send it up. And so that starts the ball rolling from the beginning. So there's a requirement there. There are some times where supervisors have to make a decision. Is this really a complaint, or are they just upset of some sort of misunderstanding? So we have to have common sense prevail on some low-level things. But there are issues that come to us that automatically are internal affairs investigations. Sometimes we'll do administrative reviews to figure out what's the best course to investigate this. And then other times we'll give it to a supervisor to review. But I will tell you, every investigation that is conducted goes through my desk. It goes to a review. It goes to a panel of the commanders, the deputy chief or deputy city attorney. They review that case and the findings and the recommended punishment before it comes to me. And then I'll make that final decision. I'll take into all the factors and then the person's past discipline history. But I think when you talk about the old boy system, you have to have certain standards, and it's about the mission. And people have to understand that accountability piece goes for everybody, not just the people that you're friends with. Doesn't matter, who you go out on the boat with on the weekends. It's about what is the issue at hand, and we have to look at the professionalism of the organization to make sure that people, our community, trust the decisions that we're making. Because if our community doesn't trust what we're doing, or they don't have faith in the process, guess what? They're going to stop bringing complaints forward, and they're not going to tell us and give us the opportunity to fix our own house.
And Chief, how do you build on that? How do you build that same accountability across agencies? If it's a good old boy system within your own organization, that's one thing. How do you hold accountable other agencies if you see issues?
So, quite frankly, that would be up to Chief Wiley to handle in West Melbourne, and that'd be up to Nelson Boyle to handle in Palm Bay. That is a community issue. I don't have the ability to go to another police department and tell them how to handle their business no more than I do go to a corporation or another place to say how it is that they should do their,
I'm
their
referencing the
conduct.
sheriff's department, which you do have.
Well, I don't, just as in Palm Bay, just as in the sheriff's office, I have Melbourne, and that's where, what my responsibilities are. Now, as a profession, right, as a profession, we have a professional obligation to network and have discussions about issues that we're having and how do we fix them. And I can tell you, I have met with all of Palm Bay staff. When Nelson first took over, Nelson Moy was the chief of Palm Bay, first took over, his whole command staff came over. and we started talking about issues that they were having. We had officers riding in squad cars together along the southern border of Melbourne and the northern border of Palm Bay, so that we were communicating on the issues and discussing the problems that we were having, crime-related, mission-related. I think that's a start. But the other start is these community engagements. We're in the city of Melbourne. Last year, when we had, after the death of George Floyd, we had multiple protests, multiple community meetings, and whether it was in Cocoa, we were all there. If it was in Melbourne, Chief Wiley and Nelson have been here, I can't tell you, half a dozen times at least, on Saturday afternoons, tonight on a Saturday night, committed to the community, the greater community, not just West Melbourne. And so we need to continue that. I think that's probably the best way as a community we do that. And but I think that's the important thing, is that it's got to be more than just one person saying, I'll make accountability. It's got to be all of us together. And I think we can have a strong voice. And I think we do in Brevard. And I think you've had that. We had very strong meetings in Melbourne and Cocoa. About this time last year, yes.
So thank you.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of you for being a part of our panel on tonight. And I think I really just addressed one question, but it was all good. So I want to close out with this final thought, or should I say question, and I want to go down the line and have each one of you to give me your thoughts and ideas on it. We've been at this now for over an hour. It's 8:17, and we want to be done at 8:30. We want to thank our viewing audience through Facebook and all of our venues that we have here, vehicles that we have, to be able to put this on to the community. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think the more that we conversate and get to know each other, we can work together and possibly put some of the unrest under our feet, as opposed to being at our throats. And I think it's important that if we want to do it, we can do it. It's just making the effort to make it happen. So I want to start with on this end and come down. And my final question tonight is, how do we reform justice to bring accountability? How do we, Daniel, I'm sorry, how do we reform justice to bring accountability? Or do justice need to be reformed to bring accountability?
Thank you, Bishop. Well, that's a very big question. That's a very big problem.
Take a stab.
When I was driving up here, I thought, wow, this is a really great opportunity to be here. But at the same time, this is complex. This is not a police problem. This is not a citizen problem. This is a we problem. And we are doing the right thing by doing exactly what we're doing. But I do feel that it's important that just as much as I had to sit here and listen to Mr. Ross educate me and help me, it's the same. I would appeal to the law enforcement and citizens alike to open up your hearts and your minds. Be open, because we got a perception issue going on. I do believe that. And until we get through that, and it's usually perception's cured when action takes place. Something changes. And as we can make those steps in the right direction, we met a year ago already. I was at that meeting. I had the microphone running around, but we had everyone at the table. Today we have the 4 agencies. But I do think it takes the whole village. If I could use a little political thing. Thank you.
Scott?
I think the biggest thing from where I'm sitting anyway is this requires a unity of effort. And I think I applaud you guys for continuing to hold these forums and try and engage the community, because I do think it requires the whole community's effort. Without the feedback, the police don't know what needs to change or what's working well. So they need the good and the bad. But I think we're still missing partners in the community, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay. There are other organizations that should be up here as well that should be part of that conversation, because it's not just, I know we're very narrowly focused on the immediate community around here, but we are representing Brevard and to a larger extent the state, as well as the national issues. So I think there needs to be a larger engagement on both sides. But I think this has been a really good, over the last year, having these forums and these discussions has opened that dialogue that I think gets us closer to where we want to be. The only thing I hope is that, as Dan mentioned, that there are actions that come out of these, that it's not just us sitting around talking about it and then we all go back to our desks or wherever we work and nothing happens and then we do this again next month. In a perfect world, I'm a list maker. I would love to have a list of what we walk away from here with, what the goal is after, what the actionable items are. That may be too big of a thing to bite off to chew right now, but I think the way you eat the elephant is one bite at a time.
Nelson?
I want to say that awareness without a solution is only advertising a problem. And it seems awareness without a solution is only advertising a problem.
I like that.
And it seems like we keep going around in this circle talking about awareness. To have real change, I know the frustration and maybe the reaction of a lot of people is to voice how they feel and to maybe protest, and sometimes it goes beyond that. But the thing that fosters change is the communication, as well as legislation, which happens through understanding and education about how the legal system works. Rarely things will change with a bunch of noise. What needs to happen is that people need to inform themselves about the proper legislative process into getting something through that they believe is going to foster a better policing, better application of the law, and a better understanding from the community. And I think there's an expectation of change, but nobody really knows what to do about it.
So it's a great question, and I just jotted down a couple thoughts while the others were speaking. There's one, I think we need to give people the benefit of the doubt. You know, too often we see something on the news and we're quickly making a judgment. And we need to look at things from another person's perspective, and that's on all sides. I think it's very important for us to have humility to be able to understand that other people have a different view than what we're used to. I think we need to all look beneath the headline. We got to look really into the depths of the challenges that we have socially in this country. And then we need to continue to gauge each other to better understand our roles in the community and our roles as in law enforcement. Because we all have certain responsibilities that are required upon us to be able to live in a civilized society. And I think that this answer to this isn't a one-size-fits-all. I think small communities such as ours need to be able to do what works for them with their law enforcement and what works for the community. And I think that in the end, we must all denounce violence and violent crime in our community and address the root causes. And lastly, I think we need to have some sort of body or group to be able to make recommendations for reforms. I think it needs to be data-driven and based on facts rather than emotion.
Bishop, I've always believed when we talk about justice and changing justice to the benefit of us all is that there are two things that we ought to be done, and they work in concert with one another. One of them is, as Chief Gillespie spoke about, you got to put some things on paper. And I'm talking about legislation. There are some things that are passed by our state legislators and our city councils and county legislators that we need to address with them to get the proper solution to what we want. And we can't just leave that alone. We must educate people. Now I look around this room and I say to myself, not a lot of people here, but what you don't realize is how many people they talk to. You don't realize how many people are sitting in this room are educated tonight, and they heard some things they never heard before. It is like eating. We teach our children to eat in small bites. And that's how we have to do it. We can't always have this room full of people, and we, this group, cannot educate Brevard County. However, we can educate the area that we have a responsibility for and hope that that flows over into the surrounding communities. Chief Gillespie, I remember a couple of months or so ago, Titusville brought their city council, their police chief, a number of officers, and their civic leaders in Titusville, brought them all to Melbourne to attend Chief Gillespie's Police Community Relations Council. We reached out to them that night. We explained how the system worked and the success that we had had with it. And those are the kind of things we have to constantly do. You got to understand, I've told Bishop this, you got to understand something. When you do this type of thing, this kind of work in the community, it is a tough job. But you got to be tough enough to stick to it. No, you ain't going to have all these accolades and these big crowds clapping hands for you. It is a low-down, dirty deal to get things done. Thank you.
I think you have to take a balanced, holistic approach when you're dealing with a complicated issue. And again, I think everybody eloquently spoke about their perception of how things can be better. I look at it as a community, police, religious, the clergy, businesses. It's a partnership. And when you get everyone to work together, including legislature, the governor, the president, let's face it, it boils down to we're in the United States, and it's just not one single thing that's going to make the difference. But the approach has got to be, again, balanced and holistic. You just can't single one group of individuals out or one community itself. It's got to be across many networks. But I will say this, one of the biggest changes that will occur, that will make a definite impact, is that individual officer in my department doing the right things the right way. And we talked a lot about how you get, when an officer stops a motorist, how they're treated. That's very, very important. Every single contact you have in the community impacts that person's perception of the department. If I go up and say, give me your license and owner, registration, insurance, and the person says, why'd you stop me? And I said, don't you worry about it. We're already off on the bad foot, aren't we? That's not the way to do it. So we have to be intelligent about that. And I said it to my officers all the time. When we talk about community policing, it's the individual officer that makes the impact on the community, because if you do one bad contact with somebody, they're going to tell that to 100 people, and everybody's going to think bad of your department. But if you do multiple good things by making good contacts with the citizens, they remember it, and they tell that story over and over again. So again, there's no easy solution to the problem that confronts us, but certainly we all have to do our part. And I promise you, I'm going to do my best to make sure my officers are treating the citizens in the community respectfully, with dignity, don't violate anyone's rights, and if they do something wrong, let's fix it, or discipline an officer or terminate them. It's that simple.
I think the catalyst for change is what we're doing tonight of communication. I think one of the biggest things that we have to do is we not only have to communicate with each other from police to citizen, but citizens have to communicate. Police officers have to communicate. One of the key things that we have to do is when we see that something doesn't work, change means we replace it with something else. There's so many things of awareness that's been brought up about what's actually happening. But when it happens here, we have to be willing to stand up and make a change. That's the only thing that's going to change.
All right. Well, again, thank all of you for being here on tonight on a Saturday night at that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your kindness. I think that this is another effort to try to bring our community together. We've started the conversations, and we must continue those conversations, but then after the conversations, put action to it to bring change about for everyone, not just one group, but for all people, so that we all can live a quiet and peaceable life. I'd like to say again, thank you so much for being a part. I am the president of the Pushback Community Alliance. Thank you so much for being a part of our first forum of conversation on tonight. God bless.
Thank you
so much, Bishop.
Thank you.